Hello, everyone. Welcome to Wine, Women, and Words. I am Michelle, and with me, of course, is Diana. And this evening, we are joined by author Chad Stroup. Stroup. I should have asked you before we went live.
Second one.
Stroup. I'm sorry.
That's
50.
fine.
If I'm faced with a 50-50 choice, I almost always pick wrong. Like with pulling out of a parking lot and trying to remember how I get home, I always pick the wrong direction. But anyway, so thank you so much for joining us, Chad. I'm sorry we had some technical difficulties. Our technology seems to be boycotting us lately.
Yeah, it always boycotts me, so.
Well, you're in good company. Diana's laptop is rebelling against her right now.
It is, and I'm almost fixed. I might duck out for a couple seconds and then come right back in. This way you don't have the annoying double echo.
Oh, we don't have the echo yet, but every now and then it makes it.
It'll happen to some,
Yeah, it likes to rear its ugly head every now and then. But before we dive into the conversation, we are Wine, Women, and Words. So what is everyone drinking this evening?
Water.
And is that straight up?
I love that pause there.
I don't go much harder than water. Raspberry iced tea is my hard drink.
Oh, but you can save that for Friday night, right? Diana, what do you have this evening?
I have blackberry wine. So while we were on vacation last week, we went up the Oregon coast. For those of you who missed the pictures, we drove up the Oregon coast, stayed in Seattle for a few days, and then came back down through the state. But we stopped at this really cool winery called Nehalem Bay, and I picked up a blackberry wine, which is what the region is known for. And it's a very dangerous wine because it tastes like juice. It tastes like a slightly less sweet grape juice. And it's really good, but it's really dangerous because you can go through this bottle of wine before you even realize it.
So you need to put it in a box and take it with you to work. And oh, you're just having grape juice. That's all you're drinking. Not a big deal.
That is spoken like a true mother. Just put it in a baba. You'll be fine.
Don't ask questions. It'll be all right.
And Michelle, what are you drinking?
What do I have? I have a, is it a red Zin, white Zin, whichever, red Zinfandel, I think. It's all the way over there, and I have this much left. So I might have to walk across the kitchen and get a bottle.
I was going to say, yeah, you sound like you've already been tapping into the line before we started.
A little bit.
See, Chad, we're a very professional show here.
I'm glad I'm amongst professionals.
Yeah.
I'm the most professional of them all,
We take our interviewing very seriously, and sometimes wine just contributes to that.
Totally does.
But
I'm right back.
Oh.
Close it.
What the heck is that?
No, I did.
I was getting a double image of Diana there. That was interesting.
I know. I saw the Wine, Women, and Words says join the call. I'm like, wait a minute, we're all here.
Yeah, it took a few seconds for that to catch up. So now I'm back with the better microphone and the better camera.
Much better. Yeah.
It's the special horror episode where there's clones of Diana taking over Wine, Women, and Words. So I don't think we've ever actually had a horror author on the show yet. Have we, Diana? I don't think we have. Did you freeze?
She's terrified now.
I know. I should have started with an easier question. So, okay, well, I think Diana's still having some technical difficulties, so I will continue on. But yeah, like I want to say 99% sure we haven't had a horror author on the show yet. She just sent me a text and says, "Did you just lose me?" Yes, we did, Diana. Come back. So how did you first get interested in writing horror stories?
Well, I've been into horror about as long as I've been able to breathe. I mean, I was watching, you know, old Universal horror films probably by age 2 because my mother would keep me up and watching the stuff with her, and I was always into the cinematic horror, you know, from a very young age, and got very involved in it. And then I started reading Stephen King probably by the time I was, I don't know, 7 or 8, and then I discovered Clive Barker probably about age 12 when I read Cabal, which is still to this day my favorite novel of all time. And that's what really changed the game for me was Clive Barker. Um, I wasn't really so much thinking of being a writer at that point. It just didn't hit me. I started writing in high school a little bit and screwed around with that, and just for fun. Didn't really take it seriously and didn't really ever think of, oh, I'm going to pursue this. Which, you know, is a regret that I have, but I wasn't ready for it, obviously, so it is what it is. Um, that said, I did keep writing in various aspects of my life. I mean, I was very heavily involved in music, so I was a vocalist in quite a few bands, and I wrote lyrics obsessively for many years. So I was always writing, um, and I was always interested in horror, but just not writing fiction of any sort, much less horror. So it didn't really hit me until I was getting closer to, I think, well, I went back to school when I was 30, and I was originally going on the path of getting teaching credentials, um, which I did not end up doing. Um, but I took a creative writing class for fun, just as an elective. I'm like, you know what? I remember taking a couple creative writing classes when I was younger. I'm like, this was fun. I enjoy it. Why not? Let's do this. And I wrote a couple of horror short stories while I was in that class. And the professor in that class, Mel Freilicher, who I'm still good friends with, I guess he saw something in those stories that was worthwhile and thought that maybe I should consider thinking about pursuing this a little further. Maybe I should consider grad school. And at the time, I was like, no, that's too much. You know, I'm getting close to, you know, getting on track to get my teaching credentials. No, but when it was getting even closer, my wife convinced me to change paths. Basically, she's like, you have this talent, you really love doing it. Why don't you pursue that? You're gonna hate teaching. And I was like, okay, you know what? You've inspired me. Let's do this. Between Mel, my professor, and Valerie, my wife, I was like, okay, let's do this. I'm going to try this. Give it a shot. Last minute, got in all of my letters of recommendation, my writing samples, and everything, and made it in. Went to grad school. And the interesting thing about that is that one of those short stories in that first creative writing class was essentially the seeds for what became the first couple of chapters of Secrets of the Weird. So it all kind of started right there. And since I got more interested in writing, and at that point I started working on my craft more. I got into grad school. I think I was, I must have been 35 or so at that point, when I started that course. And I really started focusing on that. I'm like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. I'm going all in. And what am I going to write? I'm going to write the things that I love. I'm going to write the weird, the dark, the things that I relate to, and the things that I've grown up with and loved my whole life. But I want to put my stamp on it. And of course, going into that program, I thought, oh, I'm going to be the redheaded stepchild of the MFA program. Nobody's going to want to deal with the horror writer. But it turned out to not be the case. That turned out to totally not be the case. I mean, I'm sure there were probably some people that didn't care for what I was doing. Fine, whatever. That doesn't bother me. But I actually had a lot of support. One professor in particular, Stephen Paul Martin, who ended up mentoring me on the third year, which was the whole manuscript year. And that's where I really formulated Secrets of the Weird, and he loved it so much. He was really pushing for it, and just I had so much support. It was not expected. So I'm glad that I stuck to my guns and did what I actually cared about, wrote what I actually wanted to, and just basically. And not so. I don't want to say I gave a middle finger to anyone because I wasn't really doing that. It wasn't so much that, but sort of giving a middle finger to the convention that I should try to conform to something other than what I want to do, which was, for lack of a better word, horror, dark fiction, the strange.
Yeah, it's funny. You mentioned that even though you've been writing and you've always been writing your whole life, but you weren't ready for it earlier, which is really interesting because I'm kind of the same way. I'm a writer too, but I've never even finished a story. Like I would start, an idea and then it would kind of die away and lose interest. But you have to be at the perfect place to be able to, like, it has to choose you. Like now you will write.
Yep.
And
And the fact of the matter is, with certain exceptions, most writers aren't worth anything until they're in their 30s, anyways.
True.
I mean, just haven't had enough life. I mean, I could think of a perfect exception to that. Poppy Z. Bright was definitely an exception to that, writing some of the most incredible fiction at like 18. And I'm just like, why? That's not fair. That is not fair. But there's always exceptions to every rule. But I just think in general, most writers aren't very good until they get to a certain point and they're ready to really put all of their power into it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And Diana, are you back?
It looked like she was.
Are you frozen again? You have a very. I'm going to take a picture of the expression that you're frozen on, so I can show you later, because that's a very intense expression right there. I'm going to move over so I'm not.
I don't even see her anymore. I saw her for a second.
So, and then when I first was like doing my research and putting my questions together, I am a big baby when it comes to horror. Anything. I love horror movies, but my husband, he can do, like the disjointed walk that all the creepy.
Oh wow. Like a contortion sort of thing.
Yeah, like that walk where they like bend. He can do that walk. And
can you do the scene, the deleted scene from The Exorcist where she comes down the stairs?
Yeah, basically. I mean, he hasn't perfected the art of crawling up the side of the walls and on the ceiling yet, but he's been known to like crawl down the stairs really quick just to scare the crap out of me.
Oh, I love that.
So we don't watch horror movies very often in this house. And just as a side note, I'm segueing here, but I'm also a freelance journalist, and this weekend I'm getting like an exclusive walkthrough of a haunted house that's supposed to be one of the like premier haunted houses in Illinois. I'm like, wow. I don't know why I'm doing this to myself. I'm probably going to give myself a heart attack walking through this thing by myself. But just to give you an idea of where I am with horror. I love it, but I just scare too easily. So I looked up your the book, the secrets of the weird, and I'm looking at it. I'm like, Diana, is this the right book? I don't know. So, but the cover. So you have to talk to me about the cover, because the cover art is crazy and weird, and I mean that in the best way. It's really weird.
Yeah, well, I'm glad it comes off like that, because that's exactly the vibe we were going for. It was tough coming up with a cover idea for a book that is in some ways all over the place. I mean, there's a lot going on in the book. It's a big ensemble piece. It's not a very plot heavy book. It's a very character heavy book. And it's sort of all about, these various characters and how their lives intersect. The weirdness and the horror comes out of some of these interactions. But one of the main like themes, motifs, or what have you of the book is a transformation. There are various characters for different reasons and in different ways are changing.
Right.
So myself and Tony Rivera, who's the editor at Gray Matter Press, we were talking a lot about that, and obviously the first thing you think of is a butterfly. Okay, well that's a pretty obvious thing, but we don't just want to put a butterfly on there, because that's not very exciting. it's a start. We're getting on the right track, but what can we do with that? How can we make that a little more engaging and want to draw somebody in to look at that? So we started thinking, well, we made it a little more human, obviously, so to speak. Gave it kind of a Medusa vibe. I mean, that creature is not a character in the book. It's more of a representation of the transformation and sort of, I guess, the things that can go wrong with transformation sometimes. It's really hard to explain, but I think it worked very well. It ends up just being like, okay, this gives you an idea of what you're in for when you read this book, even though it's not an exact representation. It's like thematically, this covers it. Okay, something's not right here. This thing was either human or it was a butterfly, and it's changed into something that's neither here nor there. So yeah, that was pretty much where we came up with it.
Well, I think, and I was reading some of the reviews of it, and someone put, I wish I could remember exactly what they said, but something to the extent of like wonderfully weird in like the best way.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of encapsulates what I thought of when I saw the cover. I was like, I feel like if this is the cover, if this is only the outside of the book, I can only imagine what's going to be inside when you start going, when you start reading through the pages.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I mean, I think that's obviously what we want. We want people to think that way about it, because that's pretty much what you're going to get. You're going to get some really strange things out of this book. And again, coming back to the horror thing, I mean, it is a horror book, but it also isn't.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely some heavy aspects of horror in there, but there's a lot of things in there that, I mean, there's whole chapters that have nothing to do with the horror aspects of the story. So it's kind of all over the place as far as the vibes. There's a lot of dark comedy. There's a lot of, for lack of a better term, romance. That's a big part of the story. Yeah, I mean, and that's what I wanted. I wanted it to sort of defy genre while still paying respect to genre.
Mm-hmm. And as far as the horror genre in general, what do you think? How do you think horror is set apart from the other genres as far as the writing process? I mean, you don't, when you're writing historical fiction, you're researching and you have, real events and real people to base on, and then fantasy, I would imagine horror kind of relates closest to fantasy writing because you're creating something completely unique.
So you're asking like how the process might be different from something?
Yeah. How do you think it's set apart from other genres?
The writing aspect of horror. Well, I can only speak for the way I write it, and for me, it's very method. I get very involved in my characters, and whether they're characters I can identify with on some level, whether they're characters I can identify with on zero level, I try to get into the headspace of these characters and figure out either what scares them or what drives them, or what have you. Because out of that, you're going to find the horror.
Mm-hmm.
There are things that happen to my characters in Secrets of the Weird that are real life horrors. There are things that are completely fantastical horrors that occur. I had to do the same process for both of those and treat them on an equal level, as if the real is just as worthy as the not real. And it's a weird headspace to get in, because I mean, there's certain characters that I didn't want to get into their headspace. I mean, there's a character in the book, Cypress Glades. She's a neo-Nazi skinhead who may or may not be pure Aryan and has discovered a way to alter herself to appear more white.
Oh, wow.
I mean, like she's got this sort of, it's not magic, but it's kind of hard to describe without reading what the process is. But getting into a headspace of someone who has detestable views that are very different from my own isn't very easy. But I had to get into that headspace and understand how somebody like that operates, and treat her as human as anyone else. You know, even though she's this horrible person, I wanted there to still be sympathy for who she was, so you can understand. Oh, well, you know what? I don't agree with what she does, but I can understand why she feels the way she does, and I wish she didn't. You know, that kind of, it's like, and then there's characters, you know, that are more like me in that book. I mean, but that's also difficult to do. I don't want to write a character who's me, because then it's too transparent. So then there is a character in the book who is similar to me in a lot of ways, and that was a balancing act, because I didn't want that character to be me. I wanted him to share certain things about, you know, share certain things, personality traits and beliefs that I had, but I didn't want him to be me in any other way if I could help it, because then it's just transparent. So that's also hard. But yeah, trying to think of, actually, I had to get back to answering the heart of the question there. I mean, I do a lot of research as well. Maybe not as much as it would go into historical fiction, but I do a lot of research about characters that are very different from me, and you use that to get these characters. I mean, for me, if you don't care about the characters, and I don't necessarily mean you have to care about them as in liking them, although that's
Right.
good if you want a character to be likable. Obviously, you want the readership to like the character, but just to have the readers care about the character, just on whatever level they need to care about that character. You know, care about the villain as being detestable, care about the people who are in the gray area on that level, whatever that may be. You have to succeed at that, or the horror will fail.
Right.
If you have characters that are just stock characters, or they're not believable, or they're just boring, or whatever, who cares? Kill them or something. I don't know. I don't.
Make them interesting.
That's the thing that bothers me about a lot of horror films, and this is what gives horror a bad rap. Is a lot of these movies are just, you know, a bunch of people that I would never want to spend time with, that are just yelling at each other the whole time. They clearly don't like each other. You know, like, why are these people
Right.
spending time with one another? And it's just like, I'm looking at the clock or something, like, can they just die already? And that to me, that's bad, and that's what a lot of people think of. You know, they think horror, it's this hack 'em slash 'em thing. Oh, it's these teenagers who all they do is drink and yell at each other, and then
Right.
they get killed. And I'm like, that's like the lowest common denominator.
I mean,
So yeah.
there is a certain amount of predictability, I think, that can happen. That it's like a pothole that horror has to be aware of to avoid. Otherwise, because, you know, like the girl who answers the phone or goes down to see what that noise was in the basement, you know she's going to die, especially if she's wearing lingerie or is, you know, waiting for her boyfriend to come back. She's definitely going to die.
Yeah, see, I don't even work in that sort of territory at all. I mean, that's like, I mean, there are movies that do that thing and do it well. They're few and far between, and they're usually
Mm-hmm.
older classic ones that have successfully done that. But that's so far from the horror that inspires me, that it's just night and day. You know, I mean,
Right.
you have something like Friday the 13th, which, don't get me wrong, you know, I grew up with that stuff, and that's cool and it's fun to watch. But then you have something like David Lynch, Twin Peaks, things like David Lynch's horror. You know, I mean, he is one of the weirdest, darkest creators of the last few decades. I mean, he's an original. You know, so I mean, you have this huge spectrum of horror, and you know, I like to find myself somewhere in the middle of all that, wherever that may be.
And going back to, you know, what you were saying about you have to care about the characters, even, you know, the ones that you don't like. I think that's a really huge challenge for authors, that to find that to create a character that it's okay if your readers don't like them. You know, it's they were created to be disliked.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah, and that's a great thing. I love doing that. That's one of my favorite things to do. If I can create characters that are just so despicable, yet people want to read more about it. I'm like, yes, I have done my job.
They step into my web.
Yes. They're the most fun. I mean, I don't want to write about goody two shoes people. Even my protagonists are very imperfect.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, if they're perfect, they're boring.
Yeah, you want them to be flawed because we're all human. We're all flawed. You want them to have something wrong with them, probably multiple things wrong with them. Everybody's got their own little quirks. So yeah, I would never want my protagonist to be 100% likable. He or she would need to screw up royally in some way. Because then, no matter what, I think, whoever you are as a person, whatever you're into, whatever your life is, you can relate to screwing up.
Right.
Everybody's made mistakes, whatever they can be. You realize, oh well, that could have been me if I had made different choices in my life. I could have done something like that, and I would have regretted it. Or maybe I did do something like that. Oh yeah, I don't know. So.
And you mentioned earlier one of the first questions, I think, that this book was actually, it started out as a couple short stories or a short story for one of your writing classes, right? Yeah. So what made you, I mean, that from that time to when you sat down to write the book, what about that short story kept coming back to you to make you decide that you wanted to expand it?
I knew pretty much right after I turned it in that it was not a short story. Mm-hmm. I knew, I'm like, okay, there's a lot more to this here, because I had created the character of Trixie, who, I had never even attempted to write a character like Trixie. She's a trans woman, couldn't be more different than me in that level. I'm like cis male writing a trans woman. I just decided to try it because I like writing characters that are not like me. I feel like I can challenge myself and hopefully do a good job of it. And I wanted to just learn more about what it means to be trans, even though I could never know personal experience. There's no way I'm going to be able to get that firsthand experience, and I just wanted to do my best as I could.
Right.
So I knew that as soon as I had that character, I'm like, okay, this is a character that's important to me already, just from writing this 20-page short story. She's got a lot of story, and the person who was in the short story with her is Dr. Julius Cast, who at the time, I just had referred to him as Cast. I didn't even really know that he was a doctor yet, surgeon, to be more specific. And he was just this really interesting sort of dwarfish kind of human, maybe not quite human, and I still haven't really touched on that yet, as to what Cast is. Maybe he's human, maybe he's not. I don't know. There's more room to explore that in the future. But yeah, that character was really interesting. I'm like, okay, I like this guy. He's got a lot of gray area. He's interesting. He's definitely not a good guy, but he's not a horrible guy either. So I'm like, I like these characters. And then I just started coming up with more ideas. When I went into my MFA program, I knew that was going to be my manuscript, but I didn't know what I was going to do. And I started coming up with ideas for characters. I'm like, oh, okay, there's gonna be a punk band in the book, definitely. So I'm gonna make like one of those characters, one of the main characters. There's gonna be all these other characters. Oh, I came up with this drag queen character. Oh yeah, I got to put her in there. Came up with the neo-Nazi character, and all these other things. The Angel Ghoul, who is a guy who infiltrates the punk scene in an attempt to find people whose flesh he can consume to reach spiritual nirvana. I thought that was an interesting character. I was like, okay, these are cool, but what do I do with them? I have all these different characters. None of them seem to have any real relation. What do I do? And where it really clicked for me, I took some poetry classes too. I do write poetry off and on, not as often as I probably should to keep that sort of side of me going. But we had to take some poetry classes as fiction majors, and I was fine with that. I'm like, most of the fiction people are like, no. I'm like, bring it on. I'm like, that's like, I have somewhat of a poetic style with my prose. So it's like, I'm very into language, and I'm very into the music of language. So I'm like, oh, this is great. I love poetry. I don't read a lot of poetry, but I love writing it. So I wrote this poetry sequence that was about all of the main characters of the book, wrote out essentially their character arcs as poems, and I had the what essentially works as an outline for the book.
Oh, that's awesome.
It was really weird. It was really like a very, very abnormal way to outline a book. I'm not really an outliner per se, but that's about as close as I got to some sort of outline. I'm like, oh, I have it all here, and this is how they're all going to fit together. Okay, I got it now. And I just started pumping it out from there. I mean, I only had time to really, at that point, work on it during summer and winter breaks. I was so busy with the other stuff in the program during the school year. But yeah, anytime I had free time, I was working on it. So I just knew kind of right away that I wanted to do more, and that I still want to do more at this point, and there is going to be more. so
So do you think, you mentioned that Cass still has, all that gray area and room to explore. Do you see this expanding into different books to give different characters kind of more of their backstory or more expansion?
Sort of, yeah. I mean, there's definitely plans for more books. How those are going to work out are probably not how you would imagine a traditional series per se, because I don't operate that way. And I don't want to give anything away at this point yet because things are still in the very early stages of planning these things. But there's going to be a lot more delving into the city of Sweetville and the characters that live there. My original plan, I will say, and I'm not going with that plan anymore, my original plan was, okay, well, I might just do another book set in this universe, maybe make one of the other characters the protagonist and go from there. But Trixie had such a big reaction. Like, people really loved her character, and I really loved that character. I got so attached to her and realized she's the heart of this universe that it would almost be unfair of me not to keep exploring her as the major character, so to speak. I mean, there might be times where she goes a little bit in the background, because again, I like it to keep it fairly ensemble. But yeah, my original plan was like, oh, I'll just take one of these other, somewhat minor characters, push them to the forefront, and it's not a bad idea, kind of cool. But now I'm realizing I can still have these characters and still have them play a part, and still have them be very significant while keeping Trixie in the forefront of everything, and have, when it's in her POV at least, be the world through her eyes. I mean, Secrets of the Weird shifts POV a lot, and it probably will continue to do that in future books that are related to that universe, because I think that works best when you have more of an ensemble, just to be able to see things from the other side. Yeah, so without giving away anything, there will be.
Well, I know Diana is going to be super bummed out that her computer just rebelled against her.
What happened?
I don't know. Technology is not our friend tonight. But I think we are just about at our time. But thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us, Chad. I had a great time chatting with you. And whenever you have more news with Trixie, you'll have to come back and share it with us.
Yeah. And I have other books on the way. I've my next book will be coming out soon. I don't have a release date for it yet, but it's coming.
Well, that's exciting. Well, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. I got a comic series coming out soon as well. Again, no hard release date, but there's stuff that's finished and it has a home and it's coming. But I don't want to say, oh, it's going to be out this day, because I don't know. But it's so.
TBA. But yeah, that's awesome. Definitely keep us informed, keep us in the loop. We'd love to share it with our listeners whenever you have release dates.
Cool.
So thank you, everyone. I don't know what happened to Diana. We might, I guess, do another bonus episode to talk about Undiscovered Country, their book of the month. I could talk about it, but I don't know if you guys like the sound of my voice that much. But thanks so much, Chad, and have a good evening.
You too. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Right.
And everyone else, I guess we'll just have to keep you posted about when Diane and I will do our discussion. Check our Instagram and all of our social media sites, and we'll definitely let you know when that will happen. But in the meantime, keep reading, and then if not, we'll see you soon or definitely next week. Bye, guys.